All right, I am recording, and we are talking today about the meaning of money, which I'm so excited about. And so Catherine has been in some of the Make Meaning Hours before. Claire has not. So we'll do, and here's Barbara. So we'll start. Hi, Barbara. How are you?
I'm late.
Good. No worries. So we're just getting started. So welcome to everybody. And we are going to talk about the meaning of money in this Make Meaning Hour. So what I'd like to do is I'll introduce to all of you, I'm going to actually mute everybody if that's okay. Okay. And then when we want to jump in, we can unmute. So that's very cool. But then you don't have to worry about making quiet movements in your houses. So this is the Make Meaning Hour, and it is a new program through the Make Meaning movement, which I launched a couple of months ago. And it's just an opportunity to come together with like-minded people and talk about issues of meaning and purpose. And there are so many different aspects of that and how it can play into our lives. And so the goal with the Make Meaning movement, which is just taking shape. And so stay tuned as I figure out what I'm doing here, and hopefully you guys like to jump on the train, is really about helping people find their meaning, articulate it, and then use it to guide their next steps. So we do have a workshop starting on June 1st called What's Your Story Workshop. It's 21 days. It's an intensive. We have a private Facebook group and we have daily prompts. And the goal is to figure out what your story is. So whether you're looking for a job, and you've had to pause and now you're pivoting and you have to figure out that story that's really going to pull them in to give you an interview, give you a job, whatever it is, or you're looking for new clients. And so you need to somehow articulate, who are you and why should they choose you? It's a really cool opportunity. And people who have attended the Make Meaning Hours can have a discount code MMH, which takes the price from $97 to $47. So you are welcome to sign up if you haven't, and it starts in a few days. But other programs that I'm looking to do, which I'm right now working on building out, we're going to look at having like sort of a progression, like a channel. So the first one would be sort of the reimagining, which is for people who are just trying to figure out, like, I've been on this path my whole life. I don't know how I got on it. I just sort of fell into it. Somebody told me this was the path for me, but I don't think it's me, and I want to live by my purpose. So I'm going to reimagine what that could be. And that's probably going to be a 90-day program, and we're working on crafting that right now. And then from there would be the Start Your Business program. So there'd sort of be a progression if people wanted to do that. Lots of people have had careers or jobs, and then they want to go out on their own, but they're not sure how to go about it. And since I've done that for 20 years, it's a nice little fit. And then the third phase of it would be writing your book. And so you've had all this success and experience and wisdom, and you want to share your expertise with the world, which is a beautiful thing to do. So we're working on those, and in the meantime, having fun with these programs. So the Make Meaning Hour is to look at, what's the meaning behind all these things that we do and how we act, and different programs. And I'm really excited today to talk about the meaning of money. So before I jump in and throw all kinds of things at you guys, I would love it if you could each introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about, what comes to mind when you hear that phrase, the meaning of money. Like, is there, what prompted you to want to be here? So Claire, would you like to start?
Thank you for unmuting me. Yes, my name is Claire. And gosh, I am at a stage right now where my husband and I are working toward thinking about retirement and where do we want to be? What place do we want to occupy? What are our purposes for that next stage of life? And how soon can we actually embark on it? Probably not very soon, because of money. You need to have a solid foundation and a good understanding of what your expenses are. So that's what money, if I were to, just off the top of my head, that's the sentence that I would come up with.
Okay, cool. Yes, very valid concern. I can totally relate. I'm a little behind you on that path, but it's definitely on the horizon. So I know what you mean. Thanks and welcome, Claire.
Thanks.
Catherine, you are up. Let's unmute you.
Okay, I'm muted. Okay, there we go.
I
was muted and you unmuted me. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Catherine, and what enticed me today about money For me, it's kind of one of those motivators. I think can be the root of evils too. I see that in a lot of different situations, but I've always been a great saver. But I guess opposite of that, I do like nice things. So I do like to spend. And I think that, work allows me to live freely. I feel now I'm super conservative. Like I punish myself, tell myself I can't buy anything until I get a job, which is probably so wrong.
Yeah.
I give myself small wins, but it's like ice cream, right? Like $3. But I'm definitely one of those people. So for me, money is a motivator, and I look forward to hear what you have to share today. It was enticing to me.
Awesome. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you.
Barbara, you are up.
For me, money has always been a really loaded term, loaded thing, I guess you could say. I've been told my whole life that I'm not good with it by my family. So that's sort of my MO about money. In the last year, I have made an attempt to get a lot more intentional about my business, focusing on bringing money in, doing things that bring money in, because I was in very much a pattern of giving too much away and doing too much for free and all of that kind of thing. And then I never have any. So changed my business model when I moved back to the States 7 years. I lived in Europe for many years, and over there I was always able to teach in universities. So the adjunct positions gave me sort of a base salary.
Mm-hmm.
And since I've come back to the States, I've found that I just haven't been able to recreate it.
Sure.
So now I'm completely reliant on consulting income, and that's a lot less stable and a lot more scary. But my pattern is to ignore, just not deal with, and then stick my head in the sand, and then discover that there's an issue and I have to solve it. Yeah. So there's just a lot of stuff for me around money. But I think the biggest thing I learned last year was
You're not alone.
It's the idea of value. Money should represent the value that you bring. And for some reason, I've always pretty much had a disconnect around that.
Well,
So
you're
that's
not
why I
alone in
came
that.
today.
You are not alone in that. Welcome. And it's interesting how the stories we are told about ourselves, whether it's in relation to money or other things, we sort of take as our real story, which in the What's Your Story workshop, we're going to dismantle and look at. So just so you know, ironically, it's part of the curriculum. But yeah, whether you're good or bad with money is such a loaded statement. And whose judgment is that? Because your perspective and relationship with money determines really what is good and bad. And I think that's a very subjective definition, So welcome, Barbara. Thank you for sharing all of that. And money issues can be really scary, for sure. So it's interesting because I'll just share before I launch into the material I have for you guys. When this pandemic started, the first thing I did was my husband and I use an app for our budgeting. For years, we would do, a budget on the computer, and it would be in a document and it would sit there. So we'd do it and we'd assign all these amounts and then we'd leave it. We never really lived by it. So I never knew if we were adhering to the budget or exceeding the budget or whatever. And then somebody told me about an app and I don't endorse any particular apps, but we're using the Every Dollar app, and it is a wonder for us. I found that we do sit down every month and we look at, what's coming in the next month and what's going out the next month. And every month it changes. So we just take it month by month and we allot every dollar a place. And since we started doing that, we have so much more money. And that's really been an interesting lesson to me. And so when this pandemic started, we sat down with the app and we said, okay, what can we get rid of? And it was actually fairly easy because all of the expenses we have for kids, like for school, they're gone. They don't have sports this spring. There's no prom. There's, all these things that we had in the budget as how much are we going to spend? They went away. Even haircuts went away. So it was easy to sort of pare things down. But that was the first thing we did, because when there's uncertainty and when there's fear, it's what can we do? How can we shrink our parameters so that we can manage it? And when I lost a couple of clients because of the pandemic, it was not a worry because we had adjusted our budget, so money is ever present and it's so, so important. And so let's dive in. Let's take a look at this. So for anybody who's in business or in some way runs a business, that there's two reasons people claim why they can't engage. So they won't buy what you're selling or they don't become a client. But they're never really the reasons. So the two reasons are I can't afford it and I don't have the time. But they're never really the actual reasons. And believe me, the people, when they say that, they do believe that's true. They believe they don't have the money for it, or they believe that that can't fit another thing in their schedule. But the truth is that when we find something of value, we find the money for it. And when we think something is worth our time, we make the time for it. There was a consultant I worked with in San Diego, I think it was, 8 years ago. And I thought it would be so helpful to my business if I worked with him that I literally paid, I feel like it was $7,500 to work with him for one day. And I flew out to San Diego and stayed in a hotel. So all of those expenses, I probably spent $10,000 to work with this guy. And I didn't have $10,000 sitting around, but I knew that by investing in that, I was investing in me and it would help my business, and it did. But at the day before I decided to do that, if you had said, do you have $10,000 sitting around to spend? I'd be like, are you crazy? No. So we find the money and we make the time when we consider something to be of value, which is really interesting when you're in business, because when a potential customer who seems like such a good fit comes to you and then they say, I'm sorry, we just can't afford your rates. Maybe they just don't see the value. Maybe they don't think what you have to offer is worth that price. And so that's interesting. So either you have the conversation to try to show the value, or you realize you're not going to succeed, and so you find a different client. But it's really helpful to know this because it's empowering, because then you don't feel like you have to compete by giving discounts and bargain basement prices. You can say, I'm confident in my price and I know what my worth is. And if they don't see the value, they're not a right fit for me at this time. And there's a lot of confidence and strength in being able to do that. So I'd like to explore at the beginning of this conversation, your relationship to money. So I'm going to ask you guys, if you have a pen and paper, to take just 2 minutes and free write about the thoughts and words that come to mind when you hear the word money. So you introduced a little bit when we started this session, but just write for 2 minutes. Don't judge it, don't edit, whatever comes to mind. Anything at all, go. All right. So I'm sure you could keep going, but I'd love to hear what came up for you. Who might like to share? And if you can unmute yourself, go ahead and let's hear from you guys.
I'll totally share.
Yay, thank you.
So when I was a kid, I had this level of anxiety when my parents would talk about things like mortgage and escrow and stuff that absolutely made no sense at all to me. And I realized that well, the reason that I had anxiety about it was because I thought when I became an adult, would I really ever be able to understand what those things were? And how do I know? How do I know what I need or what I will need? And what if I forget and don't pay my taxes? And I realized that I still kind of have those anxieties about like, well, how do I know? How do I know I'm not over-insuring myself? How do I know that I'm not under-insuring myself? You know, like the nitty gritty.
Yeah.
So that is one thing that I definitely wrote down. And finally, one of the things that I wrote down in terms of a goal is I'd like to be able to think more creatively about money, about earning it, and about spending it.
I love that. How do I know and think more creatively about money? And yeah, I mean, that's the thing when you're a kid and you think adults know what they're doing and then you grow up, or I actually remember thinking, this is a total aside, but that, there wouldn't be cliques and there wouldn't be popular and unpopular when you were an adult and everybody would just be nice. I grew up and I'm like, yeah, no, okay, that's fine. So I mean, adults are just grown up kids and we sort of know, and maybe we know a little bit more, but we're still shooting in the dark sometimes, right?
Right.
Well, thanks for going first and sharing, Claire. Who else would like to share?
I'll go.
Okay.
So mine was a lot different.
Okay.
I put, when I think of money, the first thing I put on my list was provides a comfortable lifestyle and allows me, like when I think of what I do with my money, it allows me to travel, to live in the home we live in, the area that we live in. It also allows me to save, like my future, I think of too, like we're kind of not at that halfway point, but we have a good, 12 to 15 years left. And we have, created this Excel spreadsheet and meet with a financial planner. So it allows me to kind of be futuristic too. And,
Sure.
think of that next life once I'm done with this part of my, journey. And it's kind of exciting because you never think you're going to get there, but, we can see the vision now. And then when I think of it too, I went back to as a child, I really saw my dad as a role model, and my mom for that matter. She worked inside the home, but my dad worked outside, and he always showed up. He never complained. He was a hard worker and really was transparent. Like when he got laid off, he got called back, but he went to be a fireman volunteer for the township. And then he also created his own business that he gave up recently, but has since kind of long story. But anyway, he had that for a long time and he had 3 jobs. So he's always been like that. When I think of a hard worker, I think of money as you have to play hard and work hard in order to get it unless it's inherently given to you. So that's what it kind of represents to me. It's not like the golden platter, if you may.
Yeah. Interesting. So both you and Claire talked about some childhood lessons on money. And when we started using this app, I started including my kids in the monthly budgeting process. So, in the first few months, my daughter would be like, I need this right now. And I'm like, well, it's not in the budget. And then in subsequent months, I would say, okay, we're budgeting. Do you guys need anything next month? Do you need a new pair of shoes? Do you need a haircut, whatever it is? And so now I'm hoping that those lessons teach them to be mindful and to plan and to be responsible, but to see that it's a very transparent process. So I'll share with them how much I make and what we have to use and what our house costs, because I want them to grow up knowing that and not being afraid of money. When I was a kid, my parents didn't discuss any of that. So it was a big mystery. And I want to not make it a mystery and just make it very every day, okay, we can do this, So thank you. Thank you for sharing. Barbara, would you like to share anything? Oh, we need to unmute you. Hold on.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't unmute myself. So I just free associated, and today everything was pretty negative.
Okay.
So fear, not enough, I hate it. Problem, chronic under earning, it's too expensive, we can't afford that. I shouldn't spend on this. Compulsive spending, I hate budgets, restrictive straitjacket.
How did it feel when you sort of look that over?
It feels
afterwards?
icky. It feels
Yeah?
icky. Yeah. But I think for me, childhood wise, I attribute all of my money angst to an event that took place when I was 15. my father died suddenly on the golf course, and he was the sole earner in the family, had his own business. And my mom, understandably freaked out about money.
Sure. Yeah.
And I didn't know until pretty recently that part of the reason for that was that the people in whose hands my father had entrusted his trust and all this stuff just didn't really communicate with her. She didn't know how much money we had, and she couldn't get anybody to tell her. And and my brother knew more about that, interestingly, than I did. He was only 13, but I don't know. He's always been the good one with money. But I think that somehow I think I internalized a lot of her angst and fear around not having enough. And, for a while we were going to have to sell the house, and none of that ever came to pass. And our lives actually didn't change very much. We didn't go into poverty. We didn't have to move to the other side of the tracks. Went to college, none of that happened. But I've had a very difficult time loosening those fears that I think were hers and weren't really mine. So that's what I attribute it to. But I can have I was doing better before the pandemic, I have to say.
Everybody was. You're not alone in that, for sure.
My list probably wouldn't have been as dire if we weren't in this current situation, but my income really has pretty much dried up. So it's
there's no need to apologize. I mean, this is completely normal to feel this way and understandable. And what a pivotal event to happen at such a formative age.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the real problem was lack of information and communication.
My dad had always just handled everything. So my mother was of that generation where women pretty much had nothing to do with money. He gave her a budget or money for food. She did shopping and stuff like that, but she didn't ever have to manage money until that time.
Yeah.
And we recently had a conversation about this. I guess it was maybe kind of last summer. And there were things about that situation that I didn't realize, that, the lack of information. And, I would have been scared too. She had 2 kids. So yeah.
Yeah.
You're right about that. So, but I think it's amazing how long we carry that stuff, because I'm not particularly young.
Well, I think that we carry it as long as we choose to carry it, because we can at a certain point say, I need to work through this. And it's not easy, but just recognizing that it's there, I think, is the very first important step, because many people don't even know where it comes from or why do I feel this way. And so once you do, you can release it.
It definitely has to do with my stress default, because like when the pandemic started, I just quit tracking. I quit, and I haven't spent a lot. I haven't been a person who's gone online and bought a ton of stuff, but there are things you have to buy and things you have to do. Sure. And I just found out last week that I could be eligible for unemployment. And that hadn't even occurred to me.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. And this guy that helps me with QuickBooks helped me apply. And actually I need to go in today and check my status, but
great.
I didn't even
Silver
think
lining.
of that.
Yeah.
For sure. A resource.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And those are heavy feelings. And I thank you for trusting us with it. And if you want to continue the conversation after the session, I'd be happy to, and we could see where we go with it. So,
okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So I want to share a couple of thoughts on the heels of that from a professor of philosophy at San Francisco State University. So his name is Jacob Needleman, and he wrote a book called Money and the Meaning of Life. And I wanted to share a few main points that he shares in this book. So the first one is that he believes money is about love and relationships, and it has the power to bring people together as well as tear them apart. So think about that in an interesting way. Like, how has anybody in your life ever used money to convey love or to withhold it, or as a power move in a relationship, or as a way of partnering in a relationship? So it's a really interesting tool. I remember my parents were always very generous with me, but they definitely used money as a control thing as I was getting older. And it's funny when I think back to this, because like, why in the world would I have this argument? But my dad paid my car insurance when I was in my 20s, and I was already living in other cities. And so he felt that that entitled him to give me input and expect that I would follow what he said. And so I said, he's like, as long as I'm paying for this, da, 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 da. And I said, okay, Dad, no problem. Let me pay for my insurance. It's totally fine. And which is dumb, because until you're 25, it's really expensive. So like, thank you, Dad. It's wonderful. But he didn't want me to pay for it. And I think it was not necessarily that he wanted to control me, but it was a matter of, I'm being generous and I want to still be your dad who can do things for you. But it came out in an authoritative way, but it was money at the core. So I remember paying that bill, and then I thought, why did I take this on? Like, let him pay for it. It's great. So the second point in this book is, if you don't know your relationship with money, you don't know yourself. Now that really hit me like a truck. If you don't know your relationship with money, like you haven't really looked at it and articulated it, you don't know yourself. So that's something I want to dig into, because I think there's a lot there that we could figure out. The third point, he says, is that money doesn't create or solve problems. They're there with or without the money. So a lot of people will say, if I just earn this much, I can da 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 da, or I will be happy, or I will have success. And what he's saying is, your success or your happiness or whatever you're searching for or whatever solution you want, it doesn't exist in the money, the presence or the lack thereof. It's something within you that you have to work on and that you have to get to. So the happiness has to come from another source. And then the last point is that there's a difference between money and success. So this is really hard in our work-focused culture, because we always think that the more we make, the more successful we are. So we're climbing the ladder, and there has to come with that a raise or, some kind of, financial compensation. But what he's saying is, if you look for the joy and the struggle and the challenge of work and the happiness from just doing hard work, that is what feeds the spirit, not the money. And so that's really interesting. So that's Jacob Needleman, who's writing about money and the meaning of life. So there's another concept about money that a lot of more spiritual leaders will talk about, and the fact that money either has energy or it is energy. So some people actually believe that money itself is energy. And if you think of it that way, energy needs to flow. It can't get stuck. It can't sit in one spot. It has to be allowed to come in and to go out. And so I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I have. If you ever hold on to money too tightly, you stymie the process and you prevent abundance. So when you are reluctant to spend or to invest in a wise direction, not recklessly, a lot of things don't come to you. But when you're generous with employees or with donations, or there's a whole karmic law of contribution and then receipt. So hopefully you don't donate because you want to get it back, but this idea that if you put it out, it will come back to you. And there's this flow of money that is just ongoing. So just like a river, it has to keep moving, because you know what happens to a river when it gets stuck. If there's a dam or there's a log that fell or a tree was struck down in a storm, it gets really mucky and gross, So you have to have that flow with money. And so that means that we have to spend it consciously. So when you spend money, if you're thinking about, well, what will bring joy to me and what will bring joy to others, is this expenditure going to do both? And if so, you can feel really good about it, because that should be one of the outcomes of letting money go, is that you're contributing in a really meaningful way. If the answer is no, then maybe that's not the right expenditure. It doesn't mean don't spend. It means it's not the right direction. So then that means that releasing money opens all kinds of possibilities, which is a really different concept in a capitalistic culture, right? So the converse side of that is that limiting beliefs turn money into an enemy instead of a resource. And if it's a resource on your path of growth, you have to be able to release it. You have to be able to let it go. So we've talked about budgets a little bit. When people budget, they often find that they have more to spend. And when people invest money, that's actually an act of trust, and the universe usually rewards you for it. Now, of course, investments go up and down, and with the pandemic, we definitely are seeing that. So it's interesting, because I had been saving in just a regular bank savings account, which gets like no interest, because I turn 50 next year and I wanted to take my family to Hawaii. And so I've been saving a lot each month. And I've also been saving for my kids' college, and I have a kid going to college in just a few months. And when everything happened with the pandemic, I stopped investing in the college accounts, and I kept putting things in the bank account and said, well, Hawaii is not going to happen next year, but college will, because I have the cash sitting here. And I'm just allocating it in different directions because it's still my value that my child will go to college. And I don't want to touch the investments because they've dipped. And so I'm waiting for them to rebound, which they will, because I have the trust that it's a long-term relationship and it's going to flow, and it will fall, but it will rise. So it's just about changing our perspectives in this fluid relationship with money. So just like you have a relationship with a person, and it takes work and it takes attention, and there are times that you are really annoyed with that person, or they're really annoyed with you, and there are times that you're just head over heels. It's true in any relationship. So a relationship with money is the same way. So rather than freak out about these investments and how they dipped in the first months of the pandemic, I just didn't look at the statements and said, I know it'll correct itself in time. I'm going to trust, and I'm going to find another way to have money available for the most immediate needs. And Hawaii will happen, but it might be a year later, and that's okay. You know, so it's just having that allowance for things to have ebbs and flows, and being okay with it. It's a choice, and it takes constant attention, just like any relationship. Any questions so far before I move on? Any comments or anything you guys want to add? Nope. All right. So we've talked a little bit about lessons from childhood. Oh, did you have something, Catherine, you wanted to say? You love my perspective on things. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So that's really nice to hear. So childhood. So we probably, just like our meaning comes from our earliest days, which is something, if you guys do different Make Meaning Hours with me or other programs, you'll really delve into. I believe that our meaning and purpose is something that we know innately when we're very young, and we sort of lose track of that as we get older, and other influences cloud our perspective of self. Our relationship to money, our relationship to people, everything comes from the lessons that we learned overtly or subtly when we were children. And so it really is worth looking at, in the money situation, you know, how those lessons from childhood, whether intentional or usually not, impacted us. And then you have absolute permission to ask if it serves you today, and if it doesn't, to replace it with something that does. So in this new perspective of money, money needs to go out so that it can come in. It does multiply, especially if you use it wisely and you put it in the right directions, but it needs to be used. So if we use money with respect and we use it to help other people transform, it will happen. So I want to ask you to think a little bit about, and then maybe share your thoughts. What would change about your life if you had more money? So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And if you want to take a few minutes to jot some things down, we can, and then we can have a discussion about it. So the first question is, what would change about your life if you had more money? And I'll put these in the chat in just a second. And the second question is, what would change if you had less? And the last question is, do you believe money is in your control or something that happens to you? So I'm going to put these in the chat. Take a few minutes and answer them as best you can. And then let's talk about it. All right, why don't we finish up your last thoughts? And I'll tell you guys what comes to mind for me. Full disclosure, I've been in business, well, I've worked for myself for 20 years, but I've been in this business, in the PR marketing business, for the past 13. And I will admit that I have struggled over the years when it came to paying contractors. Not that I didn't, I always did, and I usually do very generously. But in the early years, when I wasn't sure what my revenues would be because I wasn't planning, I wasn't really taking an active role in projections, it was just a fear thing. I was holding on so tightly because I was afraid, what if we don't have enough coming in? And even in the years when I had a line of credit, which I don't do anymore because I don't usually use credit, I didn't want to use it because then I had to pay it back. So I was always very conscious of having debt. And over the years, I overcame that barrier and realized it was about fear. It was about insecurity in income and revenues. And when I poured more energy into working with the numbers as opposed to really fearing them and staying away from them, which I did for a long time, I had more to spend, and I was aware. And so I would say, okay, I have this much for graphic designers and I have this much for writers. And that also empowered me to have the confidence when I had a contractor go over on a project by double without communicating it to me. And I had the confidence to say, but we articulated that this project was this price. You just sent me an invoice for twice, and I never heard from you about that. So there needs to be a conversation in the process about it's going outside of scope, or I'm spending more time, or whatever it is. And I felt very confident in that I wasn't nickel and diming the contractor. I was being a responsible business person. It was only because I knew my numbers and I knew what was appropriate. And so that's what comes from looking these issues with money in the eye and confronting them and saying, I'm going to peel back the fear, and I'm going to embrace what I can do. So like, I do my own QuickBooks, and I actually think it's kind of fun. And definitely there have been times that I've forgotten something or I've missed an amount, and so okay, I'll call the bookkeeper and say, where did I go wrong? But for the most part, I know where the money goes and where it comes in, and I can run reports, and I feel more in control so that I can be more generous, so that I can have more come in. And it is that kind of progression. At the same time, with this pandemic, one of the things I've learned, I don't know if you guys have learned this, is that all the things I was spending money on before, maybe they weren't so necessary. So like, we had this restaurant budget because we were a family of 6 and 4 of them are like constantly ravenous teenagers. And we would spend it going out to eat and all this, and like, I don't miss it. And I mean, we've done some curbside pickup, but now my husband and I talk about how, well, maybe when it's possible again, going to a restaurant will be a special occasion like it was when I was a kid. And then that's okay, So I don't want to spend all my money on restaurants because I want to spend it in other directions. And that feels really comforting that we don't need it the way that we thought we did. So that's my 2 cents. What came up for you guys, or what insights and revelations did you have from this? Anyone want to jump in?
Okay, I'll start.
Thanks.
Lynn, it's so funny how you said that when you plan on going back to a restaurant, it might be something that is you do as a special occasion. And I'm pretty sure that there are many people in the economy who would disagree with that sentiment. But
Sure.
I totally appreciate that. I was just telling my husband on a walk this morning that I felt like the economy was like a roller coaster, and there was so much pressure for it to go up and up and up and up and up. When you're going up that hill,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's that pause, and then a free fall, and it's almost like I don't know how to describe it, and I'm certainly not an economist, but it seemed unsustainable anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And why can't we step back a little bit and have those special occasions? Why can't we do with less?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are people in the economy who would love to have my address so they could come and give me what for. At any
Well, I
rate,
want to say something to that though,
Yeah.
Claire, because yes, there are some industries that are really incredibly devastated by this pandemic, more so than other industries. and businesses, some businesses more than others, but I believe firmly that it's almost Darwinian. Like if you can be nimble enough and smart enough to innovate and evolve, which every business has to do, whether because it's a sudden and urgent need like this or just over time, think about people who made fax machines. Okay.
Yeah.
They had to figure out something else to do because nobody uses them anymore. And so over time, there's always been that, especially with technological advancements. Different industries need to figure out different ways to be. And maybe all the restaurants that we had, we didn't need all of them. And certainly there's a ton of creativity, and it was really exciting to see that happen. But we could be okay with half as many or with a third as many. I mean, we could. And it's just about seeing our society in the way that we're living in a different way. And it is about choice.
Yeah.
And so if people say, I can only do this and I can only do this way, well, you're putting yourself in a box.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've lived outside the box for 20 plus years against all odds because I chose to be scrappy and rebellious, you know what I mean? And so I think it's those choices that we do make, so the economy will weather whatever happens. It's just the people who need to adjust the emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. I think that, I mean, I could answer the questions that you asked, but I think my time is better spent in pointing out that I do agree with the concept of that the attitudes that we have they can, in a lot of cases, be directly related to the way that we were raised and how our families approached finances and money. And I could spend hours talking about that, but I am encouraging my kids to recognize things very differently than that I'm even holding on to now, that I'm hoping that I give them more freedom. And it's almost really fun because you can live through your kids who are embarking on the world and recognize that they can do anything. They're not going to necessarily put the types of restrictions on themselves that I put on myself. And that's fun because you can enjoy it along with them.
For sure. We came very late to the no debt train, and I love living on it because it's just freeing and it's like I can breathe. But I'm so glad that it's when my kids are still coming up, because if they could start their lives with no debt and continue on that path, oh my gosh, think about how much further along they could be. And so I have these conversations with them all the time because, I wish I had started out that way. I remember I have a really good friend from Ireland, Catherine is her name with a C, and she lives in London now, but she came to visit me in 1994. I was living in Washington, D.C., and she was living in Dublin, and she was spending the summer at a university here, and she came to visit me and my roommate, and we went to an outlet mall in Virginia. And my roommate and I had credit cards, and so we would shop, and it was like a 1.5 mile long mall. It was just a really huge mall. And we bought all kinds of stuff. And Catherine was at the end of her summer sojourn here, and she had cash. And it was what her parents had given her for the summer. And so she could only spend what she had left before she got on the plane to go back to Ireland. And she looked at us and she's like, how are you guys buying all this? I mean, we were like 23, and my friend was in grad school. I was working at a newspaper and made like pennies, and we're like, oh, we have credit cards. And they didn't have credit cards in Ireland at that point. And she's like, so you're spending money you don't have? And we both looked at each other because it had never occurred to us that way. And then we looked at her and we're like, that's the American way. And it was like, I mean, how tragic, but that's all we knew, And so there is a way to reimagine it. There's just, and reimagining is what gives us possibility. But I've talked enough. Who else wants to chime in? Thank you, Claire.
I can go.
Sure.
I'm going to start with your third question.
Okay.
Because for me, do you think it's in your control? I think it was. And I really think that you do have control over everything in life, money, choices, destiny, careers, like everything came to my mind, and not just the term money. Like I can go on and on and on. It's such a big thing. And then I'll go to the next one because I think that answers it. It was about less money. Like, do you feel you have less money?
What would you change? What would change if you had less?
Yeah. I think, like, when I think of myself personally, I don't think I would change anything. I think I would do things just differently. I would still try to make it happen.
Mhm.
I think back, like, as
Mhm.
a family, again, it brought me back to that. Like, we traveled, my parents think like a Hilton's expensive, right? Because they're very old school, but we traveled by a trailer and we made these grand memories. Like, we had, a motorhome. Like, it eventually grew into this grand thing, right? They got this coach and whatever, but it started off little and it
Mhm.
grew. And I think that, a dream is just like that. So I think for me, I don't think it would be differently. Like, I hope, that it could sustain itself, but just
Sure.
at a different speed. And what would I do if I had more money? I'd live like Oprah. No. So I was dreaming at that one. I'm like, what would it be like? I
I love it.
have to say I've had a very happy life with money. So haven't had some of the struggles. And I think it's because of the way the leaders that I had in my life and just, the direction my husband and I chose has been a good one with no debt. So it's a breather for me.
You know how fantastic that is, Catherine? I mean, that is so freeing to be like, my life would be the same whether I had more or I had less. Like, I'm good. I mean, that's amazing. Like, I want to applaud you
Thank
because
you.
I don't think most people can say that. I really don't. But I
Yeah,
think that's really
I
awesome.
think it's just there's more to that, and I think that I don't know, like there just is. It's deeper than that. To me, it's a huge word, like someone said initially.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Barbara, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, for me, because I tend to be on the low end of earning, I think the less money is just sort of like where I'm at
Sure.
in this moment. But the more money, I feel like money in some ways is freedom.
Mhm.
Not that I have ever wanted to have a ton of money or a rock star lifestyle or anything like that, but it just alleviates certain worries that you might have if you have less.
Mhm.
But then there's also that tendency to just acquire. And one of the things that's you guys were talking about this earlier, but when I moved to Europe, I realized that as Americans, our hobby, this was in the mid 90s, so it was 94 when you were
Mhm.
talking about the outlet mall. This was
Yeah.
our hobby. That's
Uh-huh.
what we did. We went shopping as a hobby. And I met all
Yeah.
of these people in Europe from other places that we didn't do that. It wasn't, and I lived in Italy where you could shop. I mean, the stuff was gorgeous. And, it's not that materialism doesn't exist there, but they go to museums, they go to galleries, they go do other things. And it had never honestly occurred to me that this is just what we did and still do. But also, I think one thing about the virus is that it's really ripped open this whole concept of the American economy is based on the citizens spending money. Consumer spending is what, 70% of our economic model. How
Yeah.
weird is that? How
I
weird
know.
is that? And like living in Switzerland, after I lived in Italy, I lived in Switzerland, and the Swiss just sort of get to a level of having things and then they're good with that.
Yeah.
And in fact, in their culture, we have the concept of keeping up with the Joneses. And I
Yeah.
always joke that in the Swiss culture, it's pounding down the Joneses. Like, they don't want what the Joneses have. They want the Joneses not to have what the Joneses have. It's really interesting, but it's just a whole nother mindset.
Yeah.
And they believe that everyone should have this adequate standard of living. And nobody should, I mean, they're obviously very wealthy Swiss people. So there are people way up here, but they're modest about it. If they go around flashing it, it's very frowned upon. And there's really kind of nobody very far down.
Mhm.
So it's really a different model. And I think, frankly, at this moment, we have to call into question our model of everything depending on all of us just acquiring more stuff all the time.
I
It's
think
crazy.
that's so true. Really true. It's interesting. My younger son turned 14 this past Sunday. And, what could we do for the celebration? So we went for a hike. And the whole family went. It was phenomenal. It was to one of our favorite places in Ann Arbor. And we could have taken a picnic, but instead we decided to do a curbside pickup of a favorite deli because we wanted to give them business, but we could have taken a picnic. And that was the birthday. And my daughter made a cake for him that was so gorgeous, that was like better than any cake we could have bought anywhere. And it was just being together, and it was a wonderful day. And I think he was content with his birthday, and it just made us see things differently. You know, I've noticed one of the things I missed so much in the pandemic is libraries, because I got to a point, I love books. I'm a writer, I'm a reader. And so I love to just hold books in my hands. The Kindle didn't work well for me. And so I don't want to buy more books because literally all the bookshelves are full in the house. And I feel like, you know, why do I need more? So I was just patronizing the library, and I just miss it because we can't do that right now. So if I want something new to read, which I'm not yet there, I still have a stack that I need to read. I have to order it. I have to buy it or borrow from a friend. I guess I could do. So that conspicuous consumption is just an automatic part of our lives that we can reconsider and redirect. Claire is saying that I should share the picture of Eliana's cake because it was gorgeous. Thank you. It is on my yes, so it's on my Instagram. If you'd like to follow me at Lynne Golodner on Instagram, you'll see it there. And it's just like, oh my God. And I was in total sugar shock after having a piece. But my daughter is, just as an aside, she's looking to have a career in nutrition. So she's very big on counting the calories and the nutritional aspects of the things that she makes. And she has an app where she puts in all the amounts and the ingredients, et cetera, and then calculates how many calories. So the total cake was like, she told us, what was it? It was 15,000 calories for the cake. And so when she had made a cake for Mother's Day a few weeks earlier, it was 9,000 calories for that cake. And when she served it, she said, do you want a 500 calorie piece or a 1,000 calorie piece? And when we present it that way, it's like, I don't want either, but you know, so it was very interesting, but it sort of dampened a little bit the beauty of the experience. Well, we are coming in on our time here, and I just want to thank you for having this amazing conversation with me about the meaning of money. I'm happy to continue the conversation outside of this. And if you had a good time here, send me a little comment, because I'd love to use the testimonial as we're building the Make Meaning movement. I'd love for you guys to participate in future programs. That What's Your Story workshop starts June 1st, so you can get it for $47 if you want to join me for 21 days. And if there's something else you're looking for, let me know, and I'm happy to make it. So any last questions or comments before we sign off? Anybody?
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It was really a pleasure. Have a great day, you guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.